All right, part 4. Oh man, I don't know. Maybe. I keep thinking this is the last part. We'll see, but we're reading from Werewolves of the Iron Cross, Hyenas of High Finance. And this book, basically, it's recording of conversations with Adolf Hitler and the formative years of the National Socialist movement. And so we get to hear from Hitler himself and his, his ilk there, from their own words, rather than hearing it from these made-up fairy tale, boogeyman stories that we've been brought up with. All this weird stuff about Aryan races and all that. It's just not here. You're not finding it. It's just not. It's not here. I mean, he basically wanted to get rid of the Marxist movement, and he wanted people to have the freedom to control their own nations. And he did have an idea, because if he succeeded in Europe, I mean, he would have kept some land in Poland that they'd taken from Germany. I think it was the Versailles Treaty that took land from Germany, wherever land was taken from Germany. And then everything else would have been given back, but probably with some kind of like what the United States does, where they leave these bases everywhere. Well, the United States bases are to promote the Rothschild Empire, and Hitler's bases, if he kept them, would be to prevent the Rothschild's empire, the Marxist empire, from taking over. So, and that's just, he may not even have done that, but it's certainly not the scary scenarios that they try to push on us all the time. I mean, even somebody made recently some hokey, made for television kind of series about if the Germans and the Japanese won the war, how evil would be. You know what? Even my mom, it was my mom who grew up in England and so forth, and I mean, even now she's thinking, geez, you know what? If Hitler won, we wouldn't have this problem with the Muslims over there in England now. She's right. You think Hitler would have put up with that? But at any rate, let us continue now. We're on page 197, 198, 198. Okay. Okay. All right, let's see. But first, there will have to be National Socialism. Otherwise, the peoples and their governments are not ready for the Socialism of Nations. It is not possible to be liberal in one's own country and demand socialism among nations. Education about and firm belief in National Socialism must precede that change. But if we do not succeed in taking this road, we will either be given a world empire headed by a single state, the strongest, most powerful, which will in the end have to resort to military methods to secure and maintain its power, or end up with international Bolshevism, which can equally be nothing but despotism. The first goal is obviously being striven for at present by North America, while Russia aims at the latter. Perhaps neither of them yet realizes what is happening. But as I said, if we do not succeed in paving the way for the socialism of nations, then one or another of these must set in. So, and his idea of socialism of nations was really more of a voluntary basis where, there was voluntary cooperation of these nations. There wasn't this thing of a forced globalist, universalist ideology that's being, like, some people call right now, as it's flavored right now, homo global, where the entire world has to adopt an LGBT policy, friendship or whatever, values. There's not the values of the whole world, and people should be free not to have that kind of thing forced on them. But here too I carry within me the conviction, and I see myself as a trailblazer, that humanity will find the right way. For the peoples and their states are natural creations, divinely ordained, and they are associations of men, all rights judged only for, all of whom were created by God and therefore stand side by side with equal rights judged only for the totality, each according to his abilities and achievements for the totality. The international powers that are at work to penetrate the unanimity of the national bodies, the states, the nations, to dissolve and undermine them, are therefore contrary to the nature and hostility to the divine order. And he's right, that's exactly true, that's what the Bible says. Among them are primarily Jewry, but next in line are the Catholic Church, the internationally oriented trade unions, international communism, the major international trusts, and many more. Such organizations can at times be stronger than the states, and herein lies the danger, not only for the individual state, but especially for the possibility of creating the great socialist community of nations. So if we pursue the goal of such a community of nations, and it must, as I said, be pursued, and it will be the final goal of human politics on this earth, then we must first reconstruct the independence and autonomy of the nations, even the smallest, and drive the large international organizations back to the purely technical sphere of operation, eliminating every last possibility of their influence on governments and governmental organizations. This is a further basic perception, and I agree with them 100%. And this is my idea of having a website where people can, fill out their profile and find similar-minded people that have the same ideas about what they want to see, and start establishing their own small states that are totally sovereign and independent. And then if they want to cooperate, they can. That's what Hitler's talking about here, this socialism of nations. And he's presenting this as, if these nations each get that much freedom to self-determination and so forth, then they would do this something more cooperative voluntarily. Okay. All right, let's see right now. 199, okay. Furthermore, the principle and power politics of always oppressing smaller nations, annexing them, occupying them, dissolving their statehood, divesting them of their autonomy, their divinely ordained sovereignty. This is a useless and foolish undertaking, a sin against nature. Even after Poland had, for centuries, ceased to exist as a state, it continued to harbor the will to form into a nation. Yes, one can say that the suppression of a people, the forced incorporation and artificial borders or military occupation of a particular country only heightens the will to freedom and the urge to liberation of the people in question. Gaul, Britain, Germania all became firmly defined states. Hold on, that's a little loud. Excuse me. Turn it down a little bit. One of my favorite, favorite groups. The Dutch girl group Maywood. Two sisters. Yeah. I think it was kind of a defective file. I don't know what happened here. Let me just, wow, it's crashing. Oh jeez. Let me see, I'll turn it down over here, bro. That's so weird. That file has crashed my computer. Anyways, okay, let me go continue here. Gaul, Britain, Germania all became firmly defined states only as a result of centuries of Roman despotism. Russia was unified by Mongolian and Tartar domination, and French national consciousness emerged from English occupation of northern France. Prussia became Prussia only in response to the Napoleonic occupation. Before that, it consisted of separate provinces held together only by the crown. A people can be removed only by killing the people. With the Indians or the Spanish, with the indigenous people of South and Central America. Even if one expels the members of a folk from a country or scatters them all over the world, folk does not cease to exist. Even after generations, it continues to harbor the longing for the native soil from which it was driven, or the yearning for reunification. Although Wilson recognized this fact and made it the subject of his 14 points, he subsequently bowed to the other's blind psychology of hate and the naive idiocy of those hidebound statesmen. On this point, too, the Jewish people furnish us with graphic examples. The Jews were driven from Rhineland and settled in Poland centuries ago, still have the urge to return to Germany. To this day, the Eastern Jews have preserved the German language, Yiddish, and all the Eastern Jews who migrate to the West always begin by going to countries where German is spoken. The longing for reunion in Palestine, even though higher political considerations play a crucial part in this, after almost 2,000 years of dispossession, Jewish policy could not have forged this plan with any hope of success if it were not for the dormant longing. Which is true, but I mean, there are cases where, there really are cases where people are totally never return. I mean, it's not like, he's not quite right about all this. Okay. How often do we see German immigrants eager to spend their last days in their old homeland, trying to take back their homeland with them by cultivating the language, the songs and customs, old habits? I'm the one that's kind of in favor. I think that's how America should have developed. It should have really, I think, developed as a mirror of Europe. I think that would have been a better result, personally. All right, let's see here. Okay, we're on page 199. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The application of this realization is a further great task of the future. Here lies the roots of true religion, the link to divinity. There are those poor creatures bending their knees and wringing their praying hands before carved wooden figures, and those great hypocrites hoodwink them into believing that, thanks to this behavior, their souls will sizzle a few days less in the fires of hell. But the true link to God, the elevated consciousness of being a divine creature, that is driven out of them and forbidden them. Here is where I see the logos of St. John, which Luther unfortunately translated as word. Goethe tried to rectify the error with the critical lines, "I cannot possibly place such a high value on the word. I must translate it differently." And he said, "In the beginning was the deed." But I say, in the beginning was the urge, and the urge existed from eternity, and the urge was a creation of God, and God himself was this urge, and this urge was the spark of life which resides in us, as well as it rose to consciousness in man. We pass it by, as Christ already bemoaned. The peace on earth Christ wanted to bring is the very same socialism of nations. It is the new great religion, and it will come because it is divine and it waits the Messiah. Hitler stopped for a moment before continuing calmly. "But I am not the Messiah. He will come after me. I only have the will to create the German folk, the foundations of a true folk community. And this is the political mission, though it encompasses the ideological as well as the economic. It was really interesting that Hitler, had this same Protestant rejection of, the Catholic purgatory and the indulgences and all this kind of thing, and the statuary and the iconography. And I don't know if he has permission to just decide that the word logos should have actually been urged. I mean, I can kind of see his point, but nowhere does Hitler actually really properly understand Christ and his redemptive plan. Although, here's the thing, I will say this, I think that when Jesus comes back, the world he's going to structure the world very much like this idea that Hitler has, where you still have sovereign nations, but they are willingly submitting to this sort of cooperation that is not just beneficial to, industrialist billionaires and so forth. But nowhere, you don't find Adolf Hitler submitting to Jesus in the sense that, does Jesus want him to make this objective of his life? Does he want him to carry it out or not? Does if Hitler consoled, let's say Hitler became a true believer, and Christ, submitted his will to Christ, what would be different? How would he go about things differently than? For one thing, I don't think that he would have been so aggressive. He had an objective and a goal, but he nonetheless, wanted to carry it out with violence. A war is violence. It wasn't a defensive war. Although, in fact, he got caught up into the same thing America's caught up in, all this kind of saying that we got to go to war with people because somehow in the future, if we don't do this now, they're going to control us later. It seems to me that if Hitler was rightly guided, if Hitler was submitted to Christ, he would have stuck with expelling the Marxists from Germany alone and just sticking with that. I don't think that, I think that he had enough, that would have been enough. There was enough support actually for Hitler before he decided to try to take back land from Poland, or even to go into Russia and crush the Marxists. What he should have done was got the Russian people to ask him to come in. There should have been some kind of, in other words, he wasn't that great of a political strategist. There was things he could have done, but certainly you don't get the picture that he was seeking Christ's direction in his steps and the moves he's making. Now, but having said that, once again, I think that he had some great ideas, and that trying to abolish Marxism is a wonderful thing, and trying to secure sovereignty for nations so that they can self-determined and so forth is a wonderful thing. But to have to do it with violence, the only thing you can fight defensively. He had every right to just defend, and maybe even, he could have tried to take the people back from Poland, the Germans that were being persecuted in Poland. Never could have taken back that land, I guess. I mean, I don't even really see that as being wrong, but it's just that when he thought that he would go out and in a rampage destroy Marxism, it just wasn't, it didn't turn out good, did it? Okay. Okay, so let's get back to Hitler. It cannot be otherwise, and everything in me points to the conviction that the German folk has a divine mission. How many great prophets have foretold this? Once in deep sorrow, Goethe wrote, the German folk will fulfill its universal mission only when it is compelled to do so by God's word, God's sword. See, it should have been God's word. I hope that the World War was God's sword. Should Providence have another reminder by God's sword in store for us, that would be a terrible ordeal, and that is exactly what happened. Once again, Hitler paused briefly, then he straightened his shoulders and declared louder than before, I cannot believe that the civilized nations of the world are so blind that they will lacerate each other to smooth the way for the Bolshevism. The contrary is essential. Coalition by groups into confederacies of states, into families of nations, perhaps even here and there into federal states. And that, too, is why my view of Mussolini's Italy differs from yours. It has conquered international Bolshevism and communism within its borders, which is what he should have stuck with for Germany. It is in the process of creating a folk community. It works with every possible means to realize internal strengthening of its own national characteristics. I'm not personally familiar with Italy, but what I hear from there and what I see in pictures is great and significant for the national development of Italy. Right? How much Italy has already changed under Mussolini, its imperialist goals are wrong, and if they do not remain within the limits of existing treaties, but the Italian mentality has a need of foreign policy successes as well, and Italy still has to pay back a wrong for or two that committed by the Entente of the World War. The foolishness of those statesmen, the amateurish short-sightedness of their goals, the implacable smallness of their vision are to blame for the fact that there is no peace in this world. But then he went and did the same thing more later. He just should have stuck. Just sort of stuck with Germany and fought the Marxists in a rhetorical war, and a propaganda war, and an information war. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, 199. I think we're gonna. Let me see. I might finish this, guys. This might be our last part. I think it's part 4. Okay, I got to go back. Give me a second. Now I'm going to go and launch my next part. Click to publish. All right. I'm really laughing up a storm in this one. I guess I'll go with this one. I look a little better there. I don't know. I'm talking to myself about the pictures. They give you the thumbnails and almost like driver's license photographs, you know. There's the way to make you look bad. They managed to do it. All right. Okay, this is really, well, I think that my friend had remotely worked on my computer because it's really working great right now. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's go on. 2:05. All right. Here we go. And try to get this done. I see light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. All right. The following is the English translation of a news article from an unknown German paper on Rolf Vogel. The article clipping is in the publisher's possession, along with Vogel's book in German. While this book review is negative, it nevertheless reveals numerous inconvenient facts that the reviewer, Mr. Schoeps, is either unwilling or unable to effectively explain. Translated by Veronica Clark. Hitler's Germany and the Jews. About 500,000 Jews lived in Germany until 1933. Only 270,000 had left the country by 1942. In the beginning, the Nazi regime's policy was not in fact the so-called final solution to the Jewish question, which was geared toward the physical extermination of German and European Jewry. Instead, after the Nazis seized power, they went to great lengths to encourage and enable Jews to emigrate from Germany. So says the journalist from Bonn, Rolf Vogel, an expert on the German Jewish problem in his book, A Missing Stamp, Documents on the Emigration of German Jews. Little is made of this release, yet most of the published documents therein are informative, if not for any other reason than that they paint a coherent picture of Nazis' official policy to get Jews to emigrate and trace its progression from Havara Transfer Agreement of 1933 to the Madagascar Plan on the secret negotiations of the Vian Refugee Committee with the German authorities, 1939. About 500,000 Jews lived in Germany before it took power in 1933, but only about 270,000 left the country between 1933 and 1942. The open and concealed confiscation of assets, the binding of a formal emigration policy already in existence to the Foreign Exchange Commission of the German Reich, and the general worsening of emigration restrictions, all of these factors played a role in limiting emigration. But it was mainly the refusal of most states in the world to accept larger contingents of Jewish immigrants that made things difficult and that prevented perhaps a much greater amount of emigration of Jews from National Socialist Germany. Okay. Let's see. Now, and I heard there's a really interesting Veronica Clark interview by Davud, I think his guy's name is, a Jewish, a conservative Jew who interviewed her about the fact that Jewish property being confiscated was used to send forward to Israel to the people that emigrated. That's what they're using that money for, which is not a very publicized fact, I must say. Okay, where am I here? 235. Okay, let's move up to 235. I might get this done. I gotta get it done. All right, 235 says Hitler rejects Othmar Spann's corporate state. He considers Schott as Reichsbank president. Wagner opposes Hitler's Berlin advisors and the Hitler problem. Okay. Well, such a state, Hitler said, cannot open the way to a new great socialist awareness. It can only be reactionary. Although the idea of choosing the best is good, the plan represents regression, not progress. The format, though, which we intend to give a voice to the professional groups and their representatives, so to speak, alongside the parliament, the great forum of the will and the opinions of the vote, is unquestionably more advantageous, more suited to the times, more democratic, more socialistic. Spann's plan is better suited for the formation of a consistory or a synod for a religious community, but not for a revolutionary organization of new governmental structures, for a world that finds itself in a period of radical change. Sod shares your views. The fall of the pound will have an effect on the price structure within England, only to the degree that imported goods from countries outside the sterling bloc reach England's market. Okay. This goes into all kinds of little detail about them choosing the head of the bank, and he chose Schott. Okay, let me see. I'm sure there's some interesting stuff here, but I'm going to skip over a lot of what I thought I would read just because there's so much of it. I understand. You see, Hitler said that's what Schatz also tells me, and that's why he thinks all the plans and ideas constantly proposed by laymen and semi-professionals unrealizable and utopian. I understand that completely, and if the whole world believes it and parrots it, that is the surest way of maintaining the old order, and with it the rule of old capital over labor. But in that case, we need not be surprised if the masses rush to join Marxism in the end, and in the end use Bolshevism to smash the capitalist prison, a destruction that unfortunately also includes the bricks with which we wish to erect our social economy. Hitler looked thoughtful. So you believe that in any circumstances we must fight against Schott and against the prevailing conception in the area of monetary and fiscal policy. The fact that we must fight is irrefutable as far as I'm concerned, but when to fight, that is another question. We cannot overturn an existing order from one day to the next and replace it with a new one. On the occasion of the discussion of the economic policy section last spring in Munich, you yourself said such a thing, and an upheaval, because that is what we are talking about, has to be preceded by preparation and education lasting years, perhaps even decades. I will go further. Training in general will have to take place. Training in every field according to rules, culture, and instinctive, scientific, and even religious, in order to convert the perception and thought of the coming generation of the folk from capitalist liberalism to an understanding of the exigency and the necessity of socialism, so that this new order will be ever more stronger and even more loudly desired, demanded, and carried out and finished. For the introduction of a socialist economy is more than a decree. It requires moral understanding, ethical conviction, a religious profession of faith. He says, we're overcoming a monetary system already attacked by Moses and Christ, which could be maintained but to the present day only by keeping people stupid and terrorizing them with mendacious sanctimoniousness. To bring about this powerful revolution is our mission. To prevent it, on the other hand, is the intention and perhaps already the task assigned to Schott. It will take several decades. Okay, let me see. All right, let me see if anything else catches my eye. All right, let's see. Let me see. Excuse me. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead 249. Okay. First, we have a press release by the DNB, the Deutsche Nachrichtenbüro, the official voice of the Third Reich, on 16th January 1937. In it, we read that the French government, the colonial minister in particular, was in contact with various French Jewish organizations in regards to allowing Jewish settlements in French colonies. Some studies were undertaken, and the government of Madagascar agreed to support our efforts for Jewish settlements, provided those efforts were supported by solid organizations with the necessary financial backing. Aside from Madagascar, New Caledonia, the New Hebrides, or even French Guinea should be considered. The Jewish New York Daily Tag, January 24th, dismissed all efforts, claiming that the climate in the mentioned territories was not suitable. Nevertheless, efforts continued, and the Polish government became involved. The Frankfurter Zeitung on May 13, 1937, reported that the Polish government is working on a plan to settle Polish Jews in Madagascar. Both governments, French and Polish, were looking at the possibility. Paris Daily reported that the plan to send 25,000 to 30,000 Jewish families to Madagascar, with financing made by Jews in America, England, and France. Polish commission was sent to Madagascar, who served personal adjunct to Marshall. So this was his idea, they were going to get him, for some reason, instead of Israel, Madagascar. But The Israel thing is, the Israel idea is biblical. The Madagascar thing is, you're not going to find that in the Bible. That's okay. In an article in the Vienna Daily Reich Post, 1938, we read that the French professor Cambillard writes that French culture in Madagascar will be destroyed by a massive influx of Jews, leaving the author of the Reich Post to ask if it is not of equal importance to preserve Christian culture in Europe by telling the Jews to leave. Those efforts too came to naught. The French Madagascar Plan was dropped. All right, but he's right. I mean, what the heck? What the heck? All right. Let's see. The result of all this became known as the Scotch Plan. Vogel starts out with the talk he had with Scotch on January 16, 1970, just before the latter's death. He then goes into detail as to how this plan came about. Allow me to reserve, I think this is something about the finances. Let me see. Okay. Okay, maybe I should read this. Okay. At the initiative of American President Franklin Roosevelt, a conference was convened and representatives of 32 nations met in 1938, the Swiss resort. Vogel wrote that this conference had a failure written all over it right from the start. The representatives used it as a sort of wailing wall to bemoan the fate of European Jewry, while at the same time carefully avoiding commitment to anything, and many documents provided bear this out. Mr. George Rubley, an American, was appointed chairman. They sent a commission communicate to the German embassies in London, Paris, Rome, Washington, and Warsaw, as well as others, stressing that the Jewish question had to be considered as a German problem. He continued by stating that the English envoy to Germany had contacted him, asking Germany would participate, but mentioned up front that no country was willing to take the Jews, especially if they were without adequate funds. Weizsäcker told him that easing restrictions regarding transfer of Jewish capital amassed following World War I was out of question. The British envoy again contacted Weizsäcker, asking him how this issue could be resolved. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So anyways, so that's what they're talking about. Okay. All right. He states that Schott was invited by the governor of the Bank of England to come to London for a private meeting. The Fuhrer knew about this and was in agreement. Schott reported to the AA upon his return, and then a telegram 16 December 1938 by Herbert von Dirksen in London to the AA in Berlin. Read details about Scotch Plan. Schott stayed in London for 3 days as a guest. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Boy, there's a lot, too many details. Schott then detailed his plan of having 150,000 Jews emigrate from Germany over the following year. The financing of 1.5 billion marks to be provided by consortium of foreign financiers and paid back through increased export of German goods. The aforementioned gentleman agreed to this plan. Schott also contacted Trade Minister Stanley as well as others to talk about increased trade between the two nations, which was received with enthusiasm. The Führer was also in agreement, and Helmut Wohlthat was appointed to assist, and Mr. Wohlthat had received a request from Lord Beardstead, chairman of the Royal Dutch Shell Group, to forward an assessment, re-immigration of Jews, reply immigration of Jews from Germany. The plan was to appoint a trustee to administer Jewish assets in Germany and monitor the increased exports of goods for the payment of interest, etc. Okay. Let's see here, 2000. Okay, 252. Okay, they were going to transfer their assets abroad, something that prohibited even German citizens. Okay. But voices of disquiet were also raised. Officials Heinrichs, in a letter, Weizsäcker stated his opposition. He wrote that, in his opinion, Germany has no obligation, be it moral or legal, to allow Jews to transfer their assets abroad, something that is prohibited even for German citizens, according to National Socialist doctrine, because most Jews entered Germany without any capital. They made their fortunes by dubious means, and they took away what rightly belonged to Germany. Nevertheless, Berlin was willing to proceed with this plan. We should note here that Vogel on page 57 wrote that Jews who emigrated to the U.S., most of them without funds, did very well in a very short time. And now to the conversation between Vogel and Shatwich with the documentation caption. The idea was to get rid of Jews in a peaceful manner. Shat told Vogel that he visited Hitler following Kristallnacht and told him, "This is not the way to deal with the Jews. This has to be addressed in an orderly manner." He then laid out his plan to Hitler, stating up front that it would be impossible to simply hand the Jews their capital, since most of it was tied up in real estate and the like, and also because Germany could not afford it. Thus, he needed to find this money somewhere else, and he told Hitler what he intended to do. The plan discussed previously, Vogel then asked Schatt if Hitler was reluctant to agree to his plan. Schatt answered that the opposite was the case. The Fuhrer seemed relieved. He then spoke to Vogel about his meeting with Lord Berstedt, who told him what he liked this plan very much, but needed to discuss it with Chaim Weizmann, the Jewish chief there in London. 2 days later, Berstedt returned to tell him that Weizmann was absolutely against this plan. Schatt then asked Berstedt if Weizmann gave him a reason for his refusal. Berstedt answered that he didn't know, meaning that he was not allowed to tell. Vogel then asked Schatt what he thought was behind the refusal. Schatt told him that he could only speculate, but believed it could have been. Weizmann reasoned, "It is my aim to establish Zion, to establish a Jewish state, and I can only achieve this when I allow great sacrifices to happen so as to give it all boost." Schatt believed that Weizmann harbored the idea to create sacrifices. He offered no other explanation. To raise the money for this project would have been child's play. Schatt continued because the Jews would have recovered their capital over time. He then told Vogel that he, of course, informed German officials about Weizmann's refusal, and because of this, the negotiations were discontinued. But so Schatt, following his dismissal, Göring took charge and appointed Helmut Wohltat to see if an agreement could be reached nevertheless. What should be apparent by now is that Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann was the saboteur of the Nazi Socialist-Jewish relations, not Hitler or the NSDAP, that the Jewish people allowed this fanatical racists to do them and the Germans such harm is a tragedy of immense proportions and must be recognized as such. So see, there was certain Jews that were trying to turn the situation into a bloodbath of Jews. Okay. Okay. What is this? Oh. Okay. All right. This is some footnote. Jewish supremacist and inventor of the neutron bomb, Samuel T. Cohen, asserted that his only lament was that he hadn't the chance to drop the bomb on Germans. The bomb was not yet ready. This was a feeling shared by many Jewish scientists. Cohen proudly wrote, "Germany was spared nuclear winter, but the Holocaust inflicted by European Americans in English was as bad, if not worse." The following from Cohen's book called "Fuck You, Mr. President." This was particularly true for most Jewish scientists, and there were a lot of them, including Oppenheimer. Many of them were refugees from Hitler, whose friends and relatives have suffered hideously at his hands, and who harbored precious little affection for the Nazis. They had a vindictive and even barbaric compulsion to complete the project in time to bomb Germany. Of course, this never happened, and when we finally had a couple of bombs to drop, Germany had surrendered. Trying to throw a little logic into this emotionally supercharged equation, I may say that even if we had finished in time to drop a couple of bombs on Germany, it's far from clear it would have made any real difference on the outcome of the war. By this time, the Allied bombing and shelling of German cities had reduced most of the country to rubble, and it was just a matter of time, a very short time, before Nazis would have given up. It had become clear to practically everyone but Hitler that the jig was up. Most Germans were in no mood to fight to the bitter end, as many were predicting the Japanese would do. So what might have happened if the atomic bombs had burst over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had landed on Zilkberg, Hinkeldorf? I say what happened. Undoubtedly, nuclear bombing Germany would have made scientists at Los Alamos, especially Jews, including myself, deliriously happy. One wonders, would Mr. Cohen say the same thing in Palestinians' defense? Well, besides, you see what happened there. I mean, they made every effort to try to get the Jews out. The Jewish scientists were kicked out because they were Marxists, and this Cohen is so angry because he wasn't allowed to control the Germans. They didn't want him to control them. That's all they cared about. If you won't let them control you, they will want to kill you. It's that simple. It's it's not nuclear physics, really. Okay, let's see. 6923. Okay. Soon after the initial billion-mark credit, Schott issued another Reichsmark 600 million in MEFO bills. Okay, an MEFO bill is this thing they made up. It's like kind of like a bond or something, right? In order to start highway construction. The Autobahn program provided immediate work for 100,000 unemployed and eventually assured wages for some 500,000 workers. If we want to get money moving again, we must go beyond monetary schemes. We must create decent living and working conditions for the people so that they are comfortable spending. All of the nonsense about Rothschild's financing Hitler evaporates when we actually look at what the Nazis did. They did it themselves, and it was all very simple. Take housing, for example. A married German couple could get a 4% 10-year mortgage on a brand new house. For every new or existing child they had, a fourth of the mortgage was erased. Jews say Hitler did this so that he would have future soldiers for his plan of world conquest. Why else? Forgiving mortgages cost the state money, right? Wrong. Stop listening to lies and start looking at reality. First of all, the average German family had a new baby every 2.5 years. Second, even if German couple decided to have 4 kids right away, they now had a 6-member family that needed to buy all kinds of consumer goods, plus medical care and everything else. Taxes on those goods and services created revenue for the government, which more than offset erased mortgage funds. It's funny, boy, what if they did that? I have a lot of friends that wouldn't be paying mortgages. But this whole thing was not about taxes or money. This was about getting people moving again. We would love to go into all aspects of Nazi economics, housing, apartments, factories, agriculture reform, labor relations, everything. But we won't include it here. Okay. 269. All right. 279. Okay. We are closing in on the end here. Let's get it over with. I don't want to have to make another video. Okay. All right. Hitler's social revolution elevated the worker to leader of the nation, builder of the nation, and soldier of the folk. The worker was Hitler's goal. The worker backed the Reichsmark. Hitler was able to prevent merchants from exploiting the workers who made the merchants wealthy in the first place. The merchant class in America needs to be regulated. Only when these two groups of the folk understand and accept that they need one another will they work cooperatively. Will they work cooperatively for the whole nation instead of competitively for purely individual gain. This needs to happen in the U.S. The worker, alongside the manager, merchant, owner, needs to be elevated to master of the state. Without the worker, there is no state. In fact, this leads us to the next point, which is defining the state. For Hitler, the state was the people, and vice versa. Contrast this with the American mentality, which thinks of people and government as two separate entities. In Hitler's Germany, competition was only supported insofar as it resulted in collective cooperation and achievement of something for everyone in the state. Personal competitiveness was supported only when it resulted in collective benefit. This system maintained a person's sense of personality and individuality, while at the same time supporting the communal collective will, that is the state. Hitler's conception of society was profound. First, he was advocating ending the class system in favor of folkish system. This resulted in less intrinsic value being attributed to money because the folk replaced money as primary source of reward and motivation. Hitler supplemented the profit motive behind money with national preservation motive of Germanhood. In fact, he really wished to do away with what he called filthy money, satanic money, but given the context, knew he couldn't. Hence, the revolutionary Volksgemeinschaft. In America, the rich blame the poor for the situation, and the poor blame the rich for exploitation. Both accusations are partly true, but let us look at this relationship more in detail. There's nothing wrong with wealth per se. What's wrong is extreme wealth and wealth created via exploitation of others. Contrary to American belief, there is no such thing as a self-made man. No wealth in this world is created without workers. The worker creates wealth, not the wealthy. Thus, the wealthy that organize and profit from workers need to respect those workers. As such, any person who makes wealth via exploitation needs to be stripped of their wealth and dispossessed of any and all future organizing and for any reason. In Hitler's Germany, exploitive wealth acquisition was eradicated, as was its cousin, finance capitalism. Thanks to Hitler, Nazi Germany, individual German competitors became folkish comrades in life. Cooperation, trust, cohesion, and unity are, in fact, empirically proven factors of successful groups and teams, and all reasons why families and cooperatives are cooperative before they are competitive. Several compete with another, but they are first and foremost cooperative. Hitler put the worker on par with the leader. In fact, his merit-based system was the practical realization of the American dream. Any German with talent could rise to a leadership position in the right, and this happened often. Interestingly, Hitler saw the party not as a political party meant to rule, but solely as a vehicle of recruitment for educating and training talent. Hitler maintained the party concept for this purpose alone, to recruit and groom the future leaders of the nation. He described the party as the German people. He told Germans that we are you and you are the party. He lamented the fact that wealthy Germans could buy their children an education and petition their children's way into leadership position, even if they were completely unqualified. Sound familiar? Hitler's merit system is alien to America's politics, but is preferable to the observed system we have long had, which consists of elite criminals being brought off by corporate and elite lobbyists and foreign fifth columnists. Okay, let's see here. Next, America must eradicate financial capitalism, making money from money, charging exorbitant interest rates, and encouraging citizens to incur crippling debt for basic necessities of an advanced civilization must all end. Hitler regulated the German stock exchange, eliminating fractional reserve banking and closely monitored private banks. Next, Hitler wanted to militarize the entire people. Is that right? This is all good stuff. Next, Hitler militarized the entire people. He even said that the military, as a separate entity, was not only unnecessary but might be done away with at some point. Hitler planned to train the entire folk in warfare and self-defense, so that a brush-up training would be all that's needed to wage war. This is no different than the original American militia concept. Citizens used to be trained in arms and defense instead of doing something constructive with that. However, Americans chose to use their martial talents to treat the Indians. Also, Hitler saw families as microcosmos. The family was revered and financially assisted. Men and women were cooperative, not competitors. Women still worked and created, but they understood that their well-being was inextricably linked to their children's well-being. Every single human being was one with his or her mother. Not so with our fathers. There is a special bond between mother and child that the American system and culture delegitimizes, but that the Nazis emphasize. Hence, America's society is wild and aimless because its children are wild and aimless. Okay, this is our last page. Finally, National Socialist Germany's military, bureaucracy, and society were all organized in parallel hierarchy. That is, they had circular communication and command structure with Hitler in the middle, instead of pyramidally, like Freemasonry. What this means is that individual Germans and various entities in the system could either directly contact or bypass Hitler when communicating or taking action. Few were entirely dependent on his authority, even though Martin Bormann stifled direct contact to Hitler later on for whatever reason, a mistake we must learn from. And there was some rivalry that developed between the groups. This structure is nevertheless preferable. Intergroup and intragroup oversight is necessary to prevent corruption, lack of creativity, espionage, and too much power accumulated in a single part of the communication and command structure. Otherwise, another problem with America is that she was founded by Freemasons and Talmudists. Hamilton himself was an agent of the City of London, which is supported by revisionist historians. As such, Americans have to reconnect with their organic heritage if they want to see cultural rebirth. So what will it take to get America to work for their nation and people instead of Freemason money and high financial warfare? It's going to take a social revolution, is what it's going to take. The Freemasons and their allies will try to subvert, infiltrate, assimilate, take over, destroy all the people, and the movement will take up the most difficult task in America. Is there anyone ready to handle this as Hitler did? Well, you know, it's too bad Trump isn't more like Hitler, right? But I don't know if America can be redeemed. I think it needs to be split up. That's my thing. Just split it up, although I may be wrong. I mean, if people, I mean, look, if Hitler didn't have this drive to make his plans enforced outside of Germany, I mean, it's almost contradictory that he did that. Although what he was thinking, he was going to save Europe from the Bolsheviks. I'm sure he thought that if he just kept the Marxists out of Germany, they would take over Europe eventually. As it happens, they took over the world now. There are just a few, I mean, Hungary, Russia, and Poland, Iran. And there's a few places that are trying to keep the Marxists from taking over now, but there's just few and far between. And, that it could catch on, but those ones that are doing it now, they have to be successful first. But this is why I'm saying I'm not about to go to any war. There's just no wars left to go that are going to be. The war is so illegitimate. You're not going to go out there and kill people to make a world that has less self-determination and consolidates power under these same people. I'm not interested in doing that, neither should anybody else. But I really look forward to having a Christian theocracy break away from the United States. That's really what I'm all about. Besides, obviously, seeing individual people come to faith in Christ and, enter into the kingdom. That way, I'm just talking about how I believe the principles of Jesus would express themselves in the world of government. After all, if Jesus is King of Kings, why do we think, basically, the Christian American is saying to Jesus, we will not have this man to rule over us. We want these frickin' humanists to rule over it. I don't. And it's about time for Christians to wise up and say, hey, why are we choosing a humanist over somebody who follows Christ? That to me is one of the things Jesus will accomplish when he returns. All right, thanks for watching the two very interesting books we reviewed. I'll be back. Hopefully my voice will be back with me next time I finish a book for another book review. All right, thanks. Take care.